Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome in. Hi, Bryant. How are you tonight? Hold up. I'm trying to adjust some things that are not quite adjusting for me. There we go. Hello, hello, that Egyptian dude. Welcome back in. You're doing well, Bryant. That's good to hear. Well, last time that I'm doing well. I did a lot of cleaning today, a lot of cleaning today and a lot of cooking, got my laundry done. It's nice to have a clean house again because I wasn't able to because of my rib injury. So being able to get everything cleaned is a really good feeling. I've still got a little bit left to go, but the main house I now feel like is livable. 3 weeks with a dog fur, so much fur, so much fur. It was nice to get all the fur picked up and just, you know, really hate cleaning up, not gonna lie. Yeah, the only reason I got it done was being on a Discord call with people and keeping my mind occupied while my hands cleaned, to be honest. That is the only way that happened all today. And that means that my voice is pretty damn warmed up, not gonna lie. So what happened last time is that... So this is a sequel to the Murders of the Rue Morgue. So we have two returning characters. We have the inspector and we have the person who he is talking to. We are working through all of the different... last time on Edgar Allan Z. So the inspector is all about the conflicting reports in the various newspapers. And because of the various conflicts and exaggerations and blatant lies, he is attempting to use that to figure out exactly how Marie Roget was murdered. Are you talking about Mr. Gadget himself? Inspector Gadget. Possibly. I don't know. Edgar Allan Poe wishes he was that creative. No, I'm joking. So we have already worked through a couple of the newspapers, Le Toit and Le Moniteur. Or have we just gotten through Le Toit? I don't know. This guy is so long-winded. So, yes. We went through what all of them said. Now he is debunking all of them. So I guess we just get started and, wait, where's my chat? Chat? Hello? There you are. Hi, chat. Okay, so I guess the best thing to do is get started. We still have a lot left to read. I'm hoping it'll take maybe about an hour and a half. This is an extremely long story, so we'd best get to it. Right now I am fueled by bagel and cream cheese, so let's go. Okay, so we have just finished with his assertions on Le Toit. We got sealed for a second. I cast a banishing spell. We've just finished with Le Toit, and he said, we shall now proceed as if the question of identity were settled to our perfect satisfaction. In other words, was the girl they found in the river, in fact, the perfumery girl? And what, I here demanded, do you think of the opinions of Le Commercier? That, in spirit, they are far more worthy of attention than any which have been promulgated upon the subject. The deductions from the premises are philosophical and acute, but the premises in two instances are at least are founded in imperfect observation. Le Commercier wishes to intimate that Marie was seized by some gang of low ruffians not far from her mother's door. It is impossible, it urges, that a person so well known to thousands as this young woman was should have passed 3 blocks without someone having seen her. This is the idea of a man long resident in Paris, a public man, and one whose walks to and fro in the city have mostly been limited to the vicinity of the public offices. He is aware that he seldom passes so far as a dozen blocks from his own bureau without being recognized and accosted. And knowing the extent of his personal acquaintance with others and of others with him, he compares his notoriety with that of the perfumery girl, finds no great difference between them, and reaches at once the conclusion that she, in her walks, would be equally liable to recognition with himself in his. This could only be the case were her walks the same unvarying, methodical character, and within the same species of limited region as are his own. He passes to and fro at regular intervals within a confined periphery abounding in individuals who are led to observation of his person through interest in the kindred nature of his occupation with their own. But the walks of Marie may in general be supposed discursive. In this particular instant, it will be understood as most probable that she proceeded upon a route of more average diversity from her accustomed ones. The parallel which we imagine to have existed in the minds of Le Commercier will only be sustained in the event of the two individuals traversing the whole city. In this case, granting the personal acquaintances to be equal, the chances would also be equal that an equal number of personal re-encounters would be made. For my own part, I should hold it not only possible, but as very more than probable, that Marie might have proceeded at any given period by any one of the many routes between her own residence and that of her aunt, without meeting a single individual whom she knew or by whom she was known. In viewing this question in its full and proper light, we must hold steadily in mind the great disproportion between the personal acquaintances of even the most noted individual in Paris and the entire population of Paris itself. But whatever force there may still be in the suggestion of Le Commercier will be much diminished when we take into consideration the hour at which the girl went abroad. It was when the streets were full of people, says Le Commercier, that she went out. But not so. It was 9 in the morning. Now, at 9 o'clock of every morning in the week, with the exception of Sunday, the streets of the city are, it is true, thronged with people. At 9 on Sunday, the populace are chiefly within doors preparing for church. No observing person can have failed to notice the peculiarly deserted air of the town from about 8 until 10 on the morning of every Sabbath. Between 10 and 11, the streets are thronged, but not at so early a period as that designated. There is another point at which seems a deficiency of observation on the part of Le Commercier. A piece, it says, of one of the unfortunate girl's petticoats, 2 feet long and 1 foot wide, was torn out and tied under her chin and around the back of her neck, probably to prevent screams. This was done by fellows who had no pocket handkerchiefs. Whether this idea is or is not well-founded, we will endeavor to see hereafter, but by fellows who have no pocket handkerchiefs, the editor intends the lowest class of ruffians. These, however, are the very description of people who will always be found to have handkerchiefs even when destitute of shirts. You must have had occasion to observe how absolutely indispensable of late years to the thorough blackguard has become the pocket handkerchief. And what are we to think, I asked, of the article in Le Soleil? Sorry, water break. That it is a vast pity its inditer was not born a parrot, in which case he would have been the most illustrious parrot of his race. He has merely repeated the individual items of the already published opinion, collecting them, and with a laudable industry from this paper and from that. The things had all evidently been there. He says, at least 3 or 4 weeks, and that there can be no doubt that the spot of this appalling outrage has been discovered. The facts here restated by Le Soleil are very far indeed from removing my own doubts upon the subject, and we will examine them more particularly hereafter in connection with another division of the theme. At present, we must occupy ourselves with other investigations. You cannot fail to have remarked the extreme laxity of the examination of the corpse. To be sure, the question of identity was readily determined, or should have been, but there were other points to be ascertained. Had the body been in any respect despoiled? Had the deceased any articles of jewelry about her person upon leaving home? If so, had she any when found? These are important questions utterly untouched by the evidence, and there are others of equal moment which have met with no attention. We must endeavor to satisfy ourselves by personal inquiry. The case of St. Eustace must be re-examined. I have no suspicion of this person, but let us proceed methodically. We will ascertain beyond a doubt the validity of the affidavits in regards to his whereabouts on the Sunday. Affidavits of this character are readily made matter of mystification. Should there be nothing wrong here, however, we will dismiss St. Eustace from our investigations. His suicide, however corroborative of suspicion, were there found to be in deceit in the affidavit, is, without such deceit, in no respect an uncountable circumstance, or one which need cause us to deflect from the line of ordinary analysis. In that which I now propose, we will discard the interior points of this tragedy and concentrate our attention upon its outskirts. Not the least usual error in investigations such as this is the limiting of inquiry to the immediate, with total disregard of the collateral or circumstantial evidence. It is the malpractice of the courts to confine evidence and discussion to the bounds of apparent relevancy. Yet experience has shown, and a true philosophy will always show, that a vast, perhaps the larger portion of truth arises from the seemingly irrelevant. It is through the spirit of this principle, if not precisely through its letter, that modern science has resolved to calculate upon the unforeseen. But perhaps you do not comprehend me. The history of human knowledge has so interruptedly shown that to collateral or incidental or accidental events, we are indebted for the most numerous and most valuable discoveries, that it has at length become necessary, in any prospective view of improvement, to make not only large, but the largest allowances for inventions that shall arise by chance, and quite out of the range of ordinary expectation. It is no longer philosophical to base upon what has been a vision of what is to be. Accident is admitted as a portion of the substructure. We make chance a matter of absolute calculation. We subject the unlooked for and unimagined to the mathematical formulae of the schools. I repeat that it is no more than fact that the larger portion of all truth has sprung from the collateral, and it is but in accordance with the spirit of the principle involved in this fact that I would divert inquiry in the present case from the trodden and hitherto unfruitful ground of the event itself to the contemporary circumstances which surround it. While you ascertain the validity of the affidavits, I will examine the newspapers more generally than you have as yet done. So far, we have only reconnoitered the field of investigation, but it will be strange indeed if a comprehensive survey such as I propose of the public prints will not afford us some minute points which will establish a direction for inquiry. In pursuance of Dupont's suggestions, I made scrupulous examination of the affair of the affidavits. The result was a firm conviction of their validity, and of the consequent innocence of St. Eustace. In the meantime, my friend occupied himself with which seemed to me a minuteness altogether objectless, with a minuteness altogether objectless, in a scrutiny of the various newspaper files. At the end of a week, he placed before me the following extracts. About 3.5 years ago, a disturbance very similar to the present was caused by the disappearance of the same Marie Roget from the perfumery of... I skipped 2 pages. Monsieur Leblanc in the Palais Royal. At the end of a week, however, she reappeared at her customary comptoir, as well as ever, with the exception of a slight paleness not altogether unusual. It was given out by Monsieur Leblanc and her mother that she had merely been on visit to some friend in the country, and the affair was speedily hushed up. We presume that the present absence is a freak of the same nature, and that, at the expiration of a week, or perhaps of a month, we shall have her among us again. Evening paper, Monday, June 23rd. Apparently that evening paper is the New York Express, according to the note. An evening journal of yesterday refers to a former mysterious disappearance of Mademoiselle Roget. It is well known that during the week of her absence from Leblanc's perfumery, she was in the company of a young naval officer much noted for his debaucheries. A quarrel, it is supposed, providentially led to her return home. We have the name of the Lothario in question, who is at present stationed in Paris, but for obvious reasons forbear to make it public. Le Mercury, Tuesday morning, June 24th, a.k.a. the New York Herald. An outrage of the most atrocious character was perpetrated near this city the day before yesterday. A gentleman with his wife and daughter engaged about dusk the services of 6 young men who were idly rowing a boat to and fro near the banks of the Seine to convey him across the river. Upon reaching the opposite shore, the 3 passengers stepped out and had proceeded so far as to be beyond the view of the boat when the daughter discovered she had left in it her parasol. She returned for it, was seized by the gang, carried out into the stream, gagged, brutally treated, and finally taken to the shore at a point not far from that which she had originally entered the boat with her parents. The villains have escaped for the time, but the police are upon their trail, and some of them will soon be taken. Morning paper, June 25th, which is the New York Courier and Enquirer. We have received 1 or 2 communications, the object of which is to fasten the crime of the late atrocity upon Manet. But as this gentleman has been fully exonerated by a legal inquiry, and the arguments of our several correspondents appear to be more zealous than profound, we do not think it advisable to make them public. Morning paper, June 28th. Manet was one of the parties originally suspected and arrested but discharged through a total lack of evidence. And the morning paper on the June of the 28th was the New York Courier and Enquirer. We have received several forcibly written communications, apparently from various sources, and which go far to render it a matter of certainty that the unfortunate Marie Roget has become a victim of one of the numerous bands of blackguards which infest the vicinity of the city upon Sunday. What is that, and should I be saying that? Okay, it's just a man who behaves in a dishonorable or contemptible way. It brought up color. I was like, Okay. Thank you for allowing me that pause. Welcome in, Gray. Welcome in, Koala. And Zach, if I didn't say so before. I'll get some water before I continue. And Reeb, hello. Is that everybody? Did I miss anybody? Water. Okay. Let us begin again. We have received several forcibly written communications, apparently from various sources, in which go far to render it a matter of certainty that the unfortunate Marie Roget has become a victim of one of the numerous bands of blackguards which infest the vicinity of the city upon Sunday. Our own opinion is decidedly in favor of these suppositions. We shall endeavor to make room for some of these arguments hereafter. Evening paper, Tuesday, June 31st, which was the New York Evening Post. On Monday, one of the bargemen connected with the revenue service saw an empty boat floating down the Seine. Sails were lying in the bottom of the boat. The bargeman towed it under the barge office. The next morning, it was taken from thence without the knowledge of any of the officers. The rudder is now at the barge office. Le Diligent, Thursday, June 26th, which was the New York Standard. Upon reading these various extracts, they not only seem to be relevant, but I could perceive no mode in which any of them could be brought to bear upon the matter of hand. Fuck me. I'm going to reread that, sorry. Upon reading these various extracts, they not only seemed to me irrelevant, but I could perceive no mode in which any one of them could be brought to bear upon the matter at hand. I waited for some explanation from Dupin. It is not my present design, he said, to dwell upon the first and second of those extracts. I have copied them chiefly to show you the extreme remissness of the police who, as far as I can understand from the prefect, have not troubled themselves in any respect with an examination of the naval officer alluded to. Yet it is mere folly to say that between the first and second disappearance of Marie, there is no supposable connection. Let us observe the first elopement to have resulted in a quarrel between the lovers, and the return home of the betrayed. We are now prepared to view a second elopement, if we know that an elopement has again taken place, as indicating a renewal of the betrayer's advances, rather than as the result of new proposals by a second individual. We are prepared to regard it as a making up of the old amour, rather than as a commencement of a new one. The chances are 10 to 1 that he who had once eloped with Marie would again propose an elopement, rather than that she to whom proposals of elopement had been made by one individual should have them made to her by another. And here let me call your attention to the fact that the time elapsing between the first ascertained and the second supposed elopements is a few months more than the general period of the cruises of our men of war. Had the lover been interrupted in his first villainy by the necessity of departure to sea, and had he seized the first moment of his return to renew the base designs not yet altogether accomplished, or not yet altogether accomplished by him? Of all these things we know nothing. You will say, however, that in the second instance there was no elopement as imagined. Certainly not, but are we prepared to say that there was not the frustrated design? Beyond St. Eustace and perhaps Beauvais, we find no recognized, no open, no honorable suitors of Marie. Of none other is there said anything. Who, then, is the secret lover of whom the relatives, at least most of them, know nothing, but whom Marie meets upon the morning of Sunday, and is so deeply in her confidence that she hesitates not to remain with him until the shades of the evening descend amid the solitary groves of the Barrière du Roule? And who is that lover, I ask, of whom, at least, most of the relatives know nothing, and what means the singular prophecy of Madame Roget on the morning of Marie's departure? I fear that I shall never see Marie again. But if we cannot imagine Madame Roget privy to the design of elopement, may we not at least suppose this design entertained by the girl? Upon quitting home, she gave it to be understood that she was about to visit her aunt in the Rue de Drôme, and St. Eustace requested to call for her at dark. Now, at first glance, this fact strongly militates against my suggestion, but let us reflect that she did meet some companion and proceed with him across the river, reaching the Barrière du Roule at such late hour as 3 o'clock in the afternoon is known. But in consenting to accompany this individual, for whatever purposes, to her mother known or unknown, she must have thought of her expressed intention when leaving home and of the surprise and suspicion aroused in the bosom of her affianced suitor, St. Eustace, when calling for her at the hour appointed in the Rue de Drôme, should he find that she had not been there, and when, moreover, upon returning to the pension, with this alarming intelligence, he should become aware of her continued absence from home. She must have thought of these things, I say. She must have foreseen the chagrin of St. Eustace and the suspicion of it all. She could not have thought upon returning to this to brave this suspicion, but the suspicion becomes a point of trivial importance to her, if we suppose her not intending to return. We imagine her thinking thus: I am to meet a certain person for the purpose of elopement, or for certain other purposes known only to myself. It is necessary that there be no chance of interruption. There must be sufficient time given to us to elude pursuit. I will give it to be understood that I shall visit and spend the day with my aunt at the Rue de Drôme. I will tell St. Eustace not to call for me until dark. In this way, my absence from home for the longest period possible, without causing suspicion or anxiety, will be accounted for, and I shall gain more time than in any other manner. If I bid St. Eustace call for me at dark, he will be sure not to call before. But if I wholly neglect to bid him call, for my time to escape will be diminished, since it will be expected that I return the earliest, and my absence will the sooner excite anxiety. Now, if it were my design to return at all, if I had in contemplation merely a stroll with the individual in question, it would not be my policy to bid St. Eustace to call. For calling, he will be sure to ascertain that I have played him false, a fact of which I might keep him forever in ignorance, by leaving home without notifying him of my intention, and by returning before dark, and by then stating I had been to visit my aunt in the Rue de Drôme. But as it is my design never to return, and not for some weeks, or not until certain concealments are effected, the gaining of time is the only point about which I need give myself any concern. You have observed in your notes the most general opinion in relation to this sad affair is, and was from the first, that the girl had been the victim of a gang of blackguards. Now, the popular opinion under certain conditions is not to be disregarded. When arising of itself, when manifesting itself in a strictly spontaneous manner, we should look upon it as analogous with that intuition, which is the idiosyncrasy of the individual man of genius. In 99 cases from the 100, I would abide by its decision, but it is important that we find no palpable traces of suggestion. The opinion must be rigorously the public's own, and the distinction is often exceedingly difficult to perceive and to maintain. In the present instance, it appears to me that this public opinion in respect to a gang has been superinduced by the collateral event which is detailed in the third of my extracts. All Paris is excited by the discovered corpse of Marie, a girl young, beautiful, and notorious. This corpse is found bearing marks of violence and floating in the river, but it is now made known that at the very period, or about the very period, in which it is supposed that the girl was assassinated, an outrage similar in nature to that endured by the deceased, although less in extent, was perpetuated by a gang of young ruffians upon the person of a second young female. Is it wonderful that the one known atrocity should influence the popular judgment in regard to the other unknown? This judgment awaited direction, and the known outrage seemed so opportunely to afford it. Marie, too, was found in the river, and upon this very river was the known outrage committed. The connection of the two events had about it so much of the palpable that the true wonder would have been a failure of the populace to appreciate and to seize it. But, in fact, the one atrocity known to be so committed is, if anything, evidence that the other, committed at a time nearly coincidence, was not so committed. It would have been a miracle indeed if, while a gang of ruffians were perpetuating at a given locality a most unheard-of wrong, there should have been a similar gang, in a similar locality, in the same city, under the same circumstances, with the same means and appliances, engaged in a wrong of precisely the same aspect, at precisely the same period of time. Yet in what, if not this marvelous train of coincidence, does the accidentally suggested opinion of the populace call upon us to believe? Before proceeding farther, let us consider the supposed scene of the assassination in the thicket at the Barrière du Roux. This thicket, although dense, was in the close vicinity of a public road. Within were 3 or 4 large stones, forming a kind of seat with a back and footstool. On the upper stone was discovered a white petticoat, on the second a silk scarf. A parasol, gloves, and a pocket handkerchief were also found here. The handkerchief bore the name Marie Roget. Fragments of dress were seen on the branches around, the earth was trampled, the bushes were broken, and there was every evidence of a violent struggle. Give me one moment for another drink of water, please. Cool. Hydrate. Exactly. Just so. Anyway. Notwithstanding the acclamation with which the discovery of this thicket was received by the press, and the unanimity? You know what I'm trying to say. I actually don't know how to pronounce this one. With which it was supposed to indicate the precise scene of the outrage. It must be admitted that there was some very good reason for doubt. That it was the scene, I may or may not believe. But there was an excellent reason for doubt. Had the true scene been, as Le Commercier suggested, in the neighborhood of the Rue Pavée Saint-André, and the perpetrators of the crime, supposing them to still be resident in Paris, would naturally have been stricken with terror at the public attention thus acutely directed into the proper channel, and in certain classes of mind there would have arisen at once a sense of the necessity of some exertion to redivert this attention. And thus the thicket of the Barrière du Roux having already been suspected, the idea of placing the articles where they were found might have been naturally entertained. There is no real evidence, although Le Soleil so supposes, that the articles discovered had been more than a few days in the thicket, while there is much circumstantial proof that they could not have remained there without attracting attention during the 20 days elapsing between the fatal Sunday and the afternoon upon which they were found by the boys. They were all mildewed down hard, says Le Soleil, adopting the opinions of its predecessors, with the action of the rain and stuck together from mildew. The grass had grown around and over some of them. The silk of the parasol was strong, but the threads of it were run together within. The upper part, where it had been doubled and folded, was all mildewed and rotten, and tore on being opened. In respect to the grass having grown around and over some of them, it is obvious that the fact could only have been ascertained from the words, and thus from the recollections of 2 small boys, for these boys removed the articles and took them home before they had been seen by a third party. But grass will grow especially in warm and damp weather, such as was that of the period of the murder, as much as 2 or 3 inches in a single day. A parasol lying upon a newly turfed ground might in a single week be entirely concealed from sight by the upspringing grass. And touching that mildew upon which the editor of Le Soleil so pertinaciously insists that he employs the word no less than 3 times in the brief paragraph just quoted, is he really unaware of the nature of this mildew? Is he to be told that it is one of the many classes of fungus, of which the most ordinary feature is its upspringing and decadence within 24 hours? Thus we see at a glance that which has been most triumphantly adduced in support of the idea that the articles had been, for at least 3 or 4 weeks, in the thicket, is most absurdly null as regards any evidence of that fact. On the other hand, it is exceedingly difficult to believe that these articles could have remained in the thicket specified for a longer period than a single week. For a longer period than from one Sunday to the next. Those who know anything of the vicinity of Paris know the extreme difficulty of finding seclusion, unless at a great distance from its suburbs. Such a thing as an unexplored or even an unfrequently visited recess amid its woods or groves is not for a moment to be imagined. Let anyone who, being at heart a lover of nature, is yet chained by duty to the dust and heat of this great metropolis, let alone such one attempt even during the weekdays to slake his thirst for solitude amidst the scenes of natural loveliness which are immediately surrounding us. At every second step he will find the growing charm dispelled by the voice and personal intrusion of some ruffian or party of carousing blackguards. He will seek privacy amidst the dense foliage, all in vain. Here are the very nooks where the unwashed most abound. Here are the temples most desecrate. With sickness of the heart, the wanderer will flee back to the polluted Paris as to a less odious, because less incongruous sink of pollution. But if the vicinity of the city is so beset during the working days of the week, how much more so on the Sabbath? It is now especially that, released from the claims of labor or deprived of the customary opportunities of crime, the town blackguard seeks the precincts of the town, not through love of the rural, which he in his heart despises, but by way of escape from the restraints and conventionalities of society. He desires less the fresh air and the green grass than the utter license of the country. Here at the roadside inn, or beneath the foliage of the woods, he indulges unchecked by any eye except those of his boon companions in all the mad excess of a counterfeit hilarity, the joint offspring of liberty and of rum. I say nothing more than what must be obvious to every dispassionate observer when I repeat that the circumstance of the articles in question having remained undiscovered for a period longer than from one Sunday to another in any thicket in the immediate neighborhood of Paris is to be looked upon as little less than miraculous. But there are not wanting other grounds for the suspicion that the articles were placed in the thicket with the view of diverting attention from the real scene of the outrage. And first let me direct your notice to the date of the discovery of the articles. Collate with this with the date of the 5th extract made by myself from the newspapers. You will find that the discovery followed almost immediately the urgent communications sent to the evening paper. These communications, although various, and apparently from various sources, tended all to the same point, the directing of attention to a gang as the perpetrators of the outrage, and to the neighborhood of the Barrière du Roux as its scene. Now here, of course, the suspicion is not that, in consequence of these communications, or of the public attention by them directed, the articles were found by the boys, but the suspicion might and may well have been that the articles were not found before by the boys, for the reason that the articles had not before been in the thicket, having been deposited there only at so late a period as at the date, or shortly prior to the date of the communications, by the guilty authors of these communications themselves. The gasp. This thicket was a singular, an exceedingly singular one. It was unusually dense. Within its naturally walled enclosure were 3 extraordinary stones, forming a seat with a back and a footstool. And this thicket, so full of art, was in the immediate vicinity, within a few rods of the dwelling of Madame de Luc, whose boys were in the habit of closely examining the shrubberies about them in search of the bark of the sassafras. Would it be a rash wager, a wager of 1,000 to 1, that a day never passed over the heads of these boys without finding at least one of them ensconced in the umbrageous hall, and enthroned upon its natural throne? Those who would hesitate at such a wager have either never been boys themselves or have forgotten the boyish nature. I repeat, it is exceedingly hard to comprehend how the articles could have remained in the thicket undiscovered for a longer period than 1 or 2 days, and that thus there is good ground for suspicion, in spite of the dogmatic ignorance of Le Soleil, that they were, at a comparatively late date, deposited where found. But there are still other and stronger reasons for believing them so deposited than any which I have as yet urged. And now let me beg your notice to the highly artificial arrangement of the articles. On the upper stone lay a white petticoat. On the second, a silk scarf scattered around were a parasol, gloves, and a pocket handkerchief bearing the name Marie Roget. Here is just such an arrangement as would naturally be made by a not over-acute person wishing to dispose the articles naturally, but it is by no means a really natural arrangement. I should rather have looked to see the things all lying on the ground and trampled underfoot. In the narrow limits of that bower, it would have scarcely been possible that the petticoat and scarf should have retained a position upon the stones, when subjected to the brushing to and fro of many struggling persons. There was evidence, it is said, of a struggle, and the earth was trampled, the bushes were broken. But the petticoat and scarf are found deposited on, as if upon shelves. The pieces of the frock torn out by the bushes were about 3 inches wide and 6 inches long. One part of the hem of the frock as it had been mended. They looked like strips torn off. Here, inadvertently, Le Soleil has employed an exceedingly suspicious phrase. The pieces as described do indeed look like strips torn off from any garment such as is now in question by the agency of a thorn. From the very nature of such fabrics, a thorn or nail becoming entangled in them tears them rectangularly, divides them into 2 longitudinal rents at right angles with each other, and meeting in an apex where the thorn enters. But it is scarcely possible to conceive the piece torn off. I never so knew it, nor did you. To tear a piece off from such fabric, 2 distinct forces in different directions will be, in almost every case, required. If there be 2 edges to the fabric, if, for example, it be a pocket handkerchief, and it is desired to tear it from a slip, then, and only then, will 1 force serve the purpose. But in the present case, the question is of a dress presenting but 1 edge. To tear a piece from the interior where no edge is presented could only be effected by a miracle through the agency of thorns, and no 1 thorn could accomplish it. But even where an edge is presented, 2 thorns will be necessary, operating, the one in 2 distinct directions and the other in 1. And this in the supposition that the edge is unhemmed. If hemmed, the matter is nearly out of the question. We thus see the numerous and great obstacles in the way of pieces being torn off through the simple agency of thorns. Yet we are required to believe not only 1 piece, but many have been so torn, and 1 part, too, was the hem of the frock. Another piece was part of the skirt, not the hem. That is to say, was torn completely out through the agency of thorns from the unedged interior of the dress. These, I say, are things which one may well be pardoned for disbelieving, yet taken collectively they form perhaps less reasonable ground for suspicion than the one startling circumstances of the articles having been left in this thicket at all by any murderers who had enough precaution to think of removing the corpse. You will not have apprehended me rightly, however, if you suppose it my design to deny this thicket as the scene of the outrage. There might have been a wrong here, or more possibly an accident at Madame de Luc's, but in fact this is a point of minor importance. We are not engaged in an attempt to discover the scene, but to produce the perpetrators of the murder. What I have adduced, notwithstanding the minuteness with which I have adduced it, has been with the view, first, to show the folly of the positive and headlong assertions of Le Soleil, but secondly and chiefly to bring you, by the most natural route, to a further contemplation of the doubt whether this assassination has, or has not been, the work of a gang. I can do it. We will resume this question by mere allusion to the revolting details of the surgeon examined at the first inquest. It is only necessary to say his published inferences in regard to a number of ruffians have been properly ridiculed as unjust and totally baseless by all the reputable anatomists of Paris. Not that the matter might not have been as inferred, but that there was no ground for the inference. Was there not much for another? Let us reflect now upon the traces of a struggle, and let me ask what these traces have been supposed to demonstrate. A gang. But they do not rather demonstrate the absence of a gang. What struggle could have taken place? What struggle so violent and is so enduring as to have left traces in all directions between a weak and defenseless girl and a gang of ruffians imagined? The silent grasp of a few rough arms, and all would have been over. The victim must have been absolutely passive at their will. You here will bear in mind that the garments urged against the thicket as the scene are applicable in chief part only against it as the scene of an outrage committed by more than a single individual. If we imagine but one violator, we can conceive, and thus only conceive, the struggle of so violent and so obstinate a nature as to have left the traces apparent. And again, I have already mentioned the suspicion to be excited by the fact that the articles in question were suffered to remain at all in the thicket were discovered. It seems almost impossible that these evidences of guilt should have been accidentally left where found. There was sufficient presence of mind, it is supposed, to remove the corpse, and yet a more positive evidence than the corpse itself, whose features might have been quickly obliterated by decay, is allowed to lie conspicuously in the scene of the outrage. I allude to the handkerchief with the name of the deceased. If this was accident, if not the accident of a gang... if this was accident, it was not the accident of a gang. We can only imagine it the accident of an individual. Let us see. An individual has committed the murder. He is alone with the ghost of the departed. He is appalled by what lies motionless before him. The fury of his passion is over, and there is abundant room in his heart for the natural awe of the deed. His is none of that confidence which the presence of numbers inevitably inspires. He is alone with the dead. He trembles and is bewildered, yet there is a necessity for disposing of the corpse. He bears it to the river, but leaves behind him the other evidences of guilt, for it is difficult, if not impossible, to carry all the burden alone, and it will be easy to return for what is left. But in his toilsome journey to the fountain, or to the water, his fears redouble within him. The sounds of life encompass his path. A dozen times he hears or fancies he hears the step of an observer. Even the very lights from the city bewilder him. Yet in time, and by long and frequent pauses of deep agony, he reaches the river's brink and disposes of his ghastly charge, perhaps through the medium of a boat. But now what treasure does the world hold? What threat of vengeance could it hold out, which would have the power to urge the return of that lonely murderer over that toilsome and perilous path to the thicket and its blood-chilling recollections? He returns not. Let the consequences be what they may. He could not return if he would. His sole thought is immediate escape. He turns his back forever upon those dreadful shrubberies and flees as from the wrath to come. I am so sorry. My mind went right to Monty Python and the Holy Grail. You must bring us a shrubbery. But how with a gang? Their number would have inspired them with confidence, if indeed confidence is ever wanting in the breast of the errant blackguard, and of errant blackguards alone are the supposed gangs ever constituted. Their number, I say, would have prevented the bewildering and unreasoning terror which I have imagined to paralyze the single man. Could we suppose an oversight in one or two or three, this oversight would have been remedied by a fourth. They would have left nothing behind them, for their number would have enabled them to carry all at once. There would have been no need of return. Consider now the circumstance that, in the outer garment of the corpse when found, a slip about a foot wide had been torn upward from the bottom hem to the waist, wound 3 times around the waist, and secured by a sort of hitch in the back. This was done with the obvious design of affording a handle by which to carry the body. But would any number of men have dreamed of resorting to such an expedient? To 3 or 4, the limbs of the corpse would have afforded not only a sufficient but the best possible hold. The device is that of a single individual, and this brings us to the fact that, between the thicket and the river, the rails of the fences were found taken down, and the ground bore evident traces of some heavy burden having been dragged along it. But would a number of men have put themselves to the superfluous trouble of taking down a fence for the purposes of dragging through it a corpse which they might have lifted over any fence in an instant? Would a number of men have so dragged a corpse at all as to left evident traces of the dragging? And here we must refer to an observation of Le Commercier, an observation upon which I have already in some measure commented. A piece, says this journal, of one of the unfortunate girl's petticoats was torn out and tied under her chin and around the back of her head, probably to prevent screams. This was done by fellows who had no pocket handkerchiefs. I have suggested before that a genuine blackguard is never without a pocket handkerchief, but it is not to this fact that I now especially advert. That it was not through the want of a handkerchief for the purpose imagined by Le Commercier that this bandage was employed is rendered apparent by the handkerchief left in the thicket, and that the object was not to prevent screams appears also from the bandage having been employed in preference to what would so much have better answered the purpose. But the language of the evidence speaks of the strip in question as found around the neck fitting loosely and secured with a hard knot. These words are sufficiently vague, but differ materially from those of Le Commercier. The slip was 18 inches wide, therefore, although of muslin, would perform a strong band when folded or rumpled longitudinally. And thus rumpled it was discovered. My inference is this. The solitary murderer, having borne the corpse for some distance, whether from the thicket or elsewhere, by means of the bandage hitched around its middle, found the weight, and this mode of procedure too much for his strength. He resolved to drag the burden. The evidence goes to show that it was dragged. With this object in view, it became necessary to attach something like a rope to one of the extremities. It could be best attached around the neck where the head would prevent it slipping off. And now the murderer bethought him, unquestionably, of the bandage about the loins. He would have used this, but for its volution about the corpse, the hitch which embarrassed it, and the reflection that it had not been torn off from the garment. It was easier to tear a new slip from the petticoat. He tore it, made it fast about the neck, and so dragged his victim to the brink of the river. That this bandage, only attainable with trouble and delay, and but imperfectly answering its purpose, that this bandage was employed at all, demonstrates the necessity for its employment sprang from circumstances arising at a period when the handkerchief was no longer attainable. That is to say, arising, as we have imagined, after quitting the thicket, if the thicket it was, and on the road between the thicket and the river. But the evidence, you will say, of Madame de Luc points especially to the presence of a gang in the vicinity of the thicket, or at or about the epoch of the murder. This I grant. I doubt if there were not a dozen gangs, such as described by Madame de Luc, in and about the vicinity of the Barrière de Roule, at or about the period of this tragedy. But the gang which has drawn upon itself the pointed animadversion, although the somewhat tardy and very suspicious evidence of Madame de Luc is the only gang which is represented by that honest and scrupulous old lady as having eaten her cakes and swallowed her brandy without putting themselves to the trouble of making her payment. But what is the precise evidence of Madame de Luc? A gang of miscreants made their appearance, behaved boisterously, ate and drank without making payments, followed in the route of the young man and the girl, returned to the inn after dusk, and recrossed the river as if in a great haste. Now this great haste very possibly seemed greater haste in the eyes of Madame de Luc, since she dwelt lingeringly and lamentingly upon her violated cakes and ales. Cakes and ale for which she might still have entertained a faint hope of compensation. Why otherwise, since it was about dusk, should she make a point of the haste? It is no cause for wonder, surely, that even a gang of blackguards should make haste to get home when a wide river is to be crossed in small boats when storm impends, and when night approaches. I say approaches, for the night had not yet arrived. It was only about dusk that the indecent haste of this miscreants offended the sober eyes of Madame de Luc. We were told that it was upon this very evening that Madame de Luc, as well as her eldest son, heard the screams of a female in the vicinity of the inn. And in what words does Madame de Luc designate the period of the evening at which these screams were heard? It was soon after dark, she says. But soon after dark is at least dark, and about dusk is certainly daylight. Thus, it is abundantly clear that the gang quitted the Barrière de Roule prior to the screams being overheard, by Madame de Luc. And it actually is a question mark in parentheses. Overheard? And although in the many reports of the evidence, the relative expressions in question are distinctly and invariably employed, as I have just employed them in this conversation with yourself, no notice of whatsoever of the gross discrepancy has as yet been taken by any of the public journals or by any of the myrmidons of police. I shall add but one to the arguments against a gang, but this one has, to my own understanding at least, a weight altogether irresistible. Under the circumstances of a large reward offered and full pardon to any king's evidence, it is not to be imagined for a moment that a member of some gang of low ruffians, or any body of men, would not long ago have betrayed his accomplices. Each one of a gang so placed is not so much greedy of reward or anxious for escape as fearful of betrayal. He betrays eagerly and early that he may not himself be betrayed. That the secret has not been divulged is the very best proof that it is, in fact, a secret. The horrors of this dark deed are known only to one or two living human beings and to God. Let us sum up now the meager yet certain fruits of our long analysis. We have attained the idea either of a fatal accident under the roof of Madame de Luc, or of a murder perpetrated in the thicket at the Barrière du Roule by a lover, or at least an intimate and secret associate of the deceased. The associate is of swarthy complexion. This complexion, the hitch in the bandit, and the sailor's knot with which the bonnet ribbon is tied, point to a seaman. His companionship with the deceased, a gay but not an abject young girl, designates him as above the grade of the common sailor. Here the well-written and urgent communications to the journal are much in the way of corroboration. The circumstances of the first elopement, as mentioned by Le Mercury, tend to blend the idea of this seaman with that of the naval officer who is first known to have led the unfortunate into crime. And here most fitly comes the consideration of the continued absence of him of the dark complexion. Let me pause to observe that the complexion of this man is dark and swarthy. It was no common swarthiness which constituted the sole point of remembrance, both as regards Valence and Madame de Luc. But why is this man absent? Was he murdered by the gang? If so, why are there only traces of the assassinated girl? The scene of the two outrages will naturally be supposed identical. And where is his corpse? The assassins would most probably have disposed of both in the same way. Sorry. But it may be said that this man lives and is deterred from making himself known through dread of being charged with the murder. This consideration might be supposed to operate upon him now, at this late period, since it has been given in evidence that he was seen with Marie, but it would have been no force at the period of the deed. The first impulse of an innocent man would have been to announce the outrage and to aid in identifying the ruffians. This policy would have been suggested. Had he been seen with the girl? He had crossed the river with her in an open ferry boat. The denouncing of the assassins would have appeared even to an idiot the surest and sole means of relieving himself of suspicion. We cannot suppose him, on the night of the fatal Sunday, both innocent himself and incognizant of an outrage committed. Yet only under such circumstances is it possible to imagine that he would have failed, if alive, in the denouncement of the assassins. And what means are ours of attaining the truth? We shall find these means multiplying and gathering distinctness as we proceed. Let us sift to the bottom of this affair of the first elopement. Let us know the full history of the officer, with his present circumstances and his whereabouts at the precise period of the murder. Let us carefully compare with each other the various communications sent to the evening paper, in which the object was to inculpate a gang. This done, let us compare these communications both as regards style and MS. Miss? I don't remember how I pronounced that earlier, I'm sorry. With those sent to the morning paper at a previous period and insisting so vehemently upon the guilt of Manet. And, all this done, let us compare these various communications with the known MSS of the officer. Let us endeavor to ascertain, by repeated questionings of Madame de Luc and her boys, as well as the omnibus driver Valence, something more of the personal appearance and bearing of the man of dark complexion. Queries skillfully directed will not fail to elicit from some of these parties information on this particular point or upon others, information which the parties themselves may not even be aware of possessing. And now let us trace the boat picked up by the bargeman on the morning of Monday, the 23rd of June, and which was removed from the barge office without the cognizance of the officer in attendance and without the rudder at some point prior to the discovery of the corpse. With a proper caution and perseverance, we shall infallibly trace this boat, for not only can the bargeman who picked it up identify it, but the rudder is at hand. The rudder of a sailboat would not have been abandoned without inquiry by one altogether at ease in heart. And here let me pause to insinuate a question. There was no advertisement of the picking up of this boat. It was silently taken into the barge office, and as silently removed. But its owner or employer, how happened he at so early a period as Tuesday morning to be informed without the agency of advertisement of the locality of the boat taken up on Monday, unless we imagine some connection with the Navy, some personal, permanent connection leading to cognizance of its minute interest, its petty local news? In speaking of the lonely assassin dragging his burden to the shore, I have already suggested the probability of his availing himself of a boat. Now we are to understand that Marie Roget was precipitated from a boat. This would naturally have been the case. The corpse could not have been trusted to the shallow waters of the shore. The peculiar marks on the back and shoulders of the victim tell of the bottom ribs of a boat. That the body was found without weight is also corroborative of the idea. If thrown from the shore, a weight would have been attached. We can account only for its absence by supposing the murderer to have neglected the precaution of supplying himself with it before pushing off. In the act of consigning the corpse to the water, he would unquestionably have noticed his oversight, but then no remedy would have been at hand. Any risk would have been preferred to a return to that accursed shore. Having rid himself of his ghastly charge, the murderer would have hastened to the city. There, at some obscure wharf, he would have leaped on land, but the boat, would he have secured it? He would have been in too great haste for such things as securing a boat. Moreover, in fastening it to the wharf, he would have felt as if securing evidence against himself. His natural thought would have been to cast from him as far as possible all that had held connection with his crime. He would not only have fled from the wharf, but he would have not permitted the boat to remain. Assuredly, he would have cast it adrift. Let us pursue our fancies. In the morning, the wretch is stricken with unutterable horror at finding the boat has been picked up and detained at a locality with which he is in the daily habit of frequenting. At a locality, perhaps, which his duty compels him to frequent. The next night, without daring to ask for the rudder, he removes it. Now where is that rudderless boat? Let it be one of our first purposes to discover. With the first glimpse we have obtain of it, the dawn of our success will begin. This boat shall guide us, with a rapidity which will surprise us, even to ourselves, to him who employed it in the midnight of the fatal Sabbath. Corroboration will rise upon corroboration, and the murderer will be traced. There's a thing in brackets. For reasons which we shall not specify, but which to many readers will appear obvious, we have taken the liberty of here omitting from the MSS placed in our hands such portions as details the following up of the apparently slight clue obtained by Dupin. We feel it advisable only to state in brief that the result desired was brought to pass, and that the prefect fulfilled punctuality, although with reluctance, the terms of his compact with the Chevalier. Mr. Poe's article concludes with the following words, EDS, of the magazine in which the article was originally published. It will be understood that I speak of coincidences and no more. What I have said upon this topic must suffice. In my own heart there dwells no faith in preternature. That nature and its gods are two, no men who thinks will deny. That the latter, creating the former, can at will control or modify it is also unquestionable. I say at will, for the question is of will and not, as the insanity of logic has assumed, of power. It is not that the deity cannot modify his laws, but that we insult him in imagining a possible necessity for modification. In their origin, these laws were fashioned to embrace all contingencies which could lie in the future. With God, all is now. I repeat, then, that I ask of these things only as coincidences, and farther, in what I relate it will be seen that between the fate of the unhappy Mary Cecilia Rogers, so far that her fate is known, and the fate of one Marie Roget, up to a certain epoch in her history, there has existed a parallel in the contemplation of whose wonderful exactitude becomes embarrassed. I say all this will be seen, But let it not for a moment be supposed that, in proceeding with the sad narrative of Marie from the epoch just mentioned, and in tracing its denouement to the mystery which enshrouded her, it is my covert design to hint at an extension of the parallel, or even to suggest that the measures adopted in Paris for the discovery of the assassination of a grisette, or measures founded in any similar ratiocination, would produce any similar results. For, in respect to the latter branch of the supposition, it should be considered that the most trifling variations in the facts of the two cases might give rise to the most important miscalculations, by thoroughly diverting the two courses of events, very much as, in arithmetic, an error which, in its own individuality, may be inappreciable, produces at length, by dint of multiplication at all points of the process, a result enormously at variance with truth. And in regards to the former branch, we must not fail to hold in view that the very calculus of probabilities to which I have referred forbids all idea of the extension of the parallel, forbids it with a positiveness strong and decided just in proportion as this parallel has already been long drawn and over and exact. This is one of the anomalous propositions which, seemingly appealing to thought altogether apart from the mathematical, is yet one which only the mathematician can fully entertain. Nothing, for example, is more difficult than to conceive the merely general reader that the fact of sixes having been thrown twice in succession by a player in dice is sufficient cause for betting the largest odds that sixes will not be thrown in the third attempt. A suggestion to this effect is usually rejected by the intellect at once. It does not appear that the two throws have been completed, and which lie now absolutely in the past, can have influence upon the throw which exists only in the future. The chance for throwing sixes seems to be precisely as it was at any ordinary time. That is to say, subject only to the influence of the various other throws which may have been made by the dice. And this is a reflection which appears so exceedingly obvious that attempts to controvert it are received more frequently with a derisive smile than with anything like respectful attention. The error here involved, a gross error redolent of mischief, I cannot pretend to expose within the limits assigned to me at present, and with the philosophical it needs no exposure. It may be sufficient here to say that it forms one of an infinite series of mistakes which arise in the path of reason through her propensity for seeking truth in detail. That is the most unsatisfying ending I think I have ever seen. So, like, we know what happened, but they still never answered who. Are they like, oh, it was just a random murder. It just happened, you know, like murders do, I guess. I feel distinctly unsatisfied after that. But that does take us to an hour, and ooh, yes. Okay, good. The next few are on the shorter side. Well, the gold bug apparently is not a short story. But I think it looks like there's a lot of weird... If we have to stop in the middle of the gold bug, that's fine. But we've got two short stories to get through first, one of which next time is The Telltale Heart. That's one most people know, and we get to read it. So that might be next Sunday, or it might be 2 Sundays from now, because I am jonesing for some karaoke, honestly. So, oh no, I didn't put the bookmark back in. There we go. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. I hope this starts your week out on a good note, despite the rambling and excessive confusion of which I was reading. I may not know who you are, but you were reborn as a new man. Welcome in, Michael, then. Hello. Welcome, welcome. And Abaddon, yes, karaoke. I've been feeling musicals and punk pop. That might just be what happens. We'll see. We'll see how I feel, how my voice is. We are coming... Oh, I have an event next weekend. You know what? Next weekend might You'll be chatting with me from now on? Okay. Well, nice to meet you again, I suppose. Next Sunday might be theater rhythm. Because I have an exciting event to go to, someone's birthday party that is going to be crazy. So yeah, that'll be pretty cool. So yeah, it's going to be a great birthday party. I'll need the space to talk about it, I think. So with that, I am going to rest my voice. I've been talking most of the day while I was doing cleaning. So all right. I hope you all have a wonderful night. I will see you all later, I suppose. Frankie, Michael, and Abaddon. And I saw, yes, Bubba, Blue, Gray, Peafowl Gamer, and Zach, and Bryant, and Conway doing a wonderful lurk. All right. I will see all of you later, and I will get a schedule, maybe not a fancy schedule made, but I'm thinking maybe a break tomorrow. I have one more meal prep to cook, and I haven't been sleeping the greatest, so I'm going to give myself tomorrow to make sure I can face the week properly. Tuesday, Wednesday, bug fables. Friday, probably some bug fables. Thursday, maybe I'll come home from brewery night and do some chainmail. Saturday, I will not be here. And Sunday will be whatever I have the energy to do. So, all right. Good night, everybody. I will see you later. Bye.